Hey everybody, I'm Lori Sulpizio, and today we're going to talk about the book Think Again by Adam Grant. This is such a great book with such a good message that I don't care what you do, who you are, what industry you're in, the ability to rethink is critical for being conscious and connected leaders and conscious and connected people. Like with all of my book reviews, I'm going to take the words right off the page as much as I can. I want you to hear exactly what Adam Grant has to say. So can you think of any measure of intelligence other than the ability to think and to learn? Well, it might surprise you to know that there's another set of cognitive skills that might just be more important and more preferred. This is the ability to rethink and unlearn. The problem is that rethinking and unlearning is a lot more difficult than it might seem, and we don't do it as consistently as we need to. Why do we resist rethinking? Well, some psychologists suggest it's easier to hang on to our older views instead of dealing with the difficulty of grappling with new ones. It's true that questioning ourselves makes the world unpredictable. It also requires us to admit that the facts that we once held on to have changed, and what we once thought was right now may be wrong. This gets us at our core. Rethinking something that we deeply believe in can threaten our identity, and it can feel as if we are losing part of ourselves. Adam Grant talks about the tendency for firefighters to die in wildfire rescues because it doesn't occur to them to put down their gear to lighten their load when they realize that they actually now need to escape the fire. As people, we are so ingrained in what we're trying to do and what we know to be true that we don't often stop to rethink what we might do in our lives to actually serve us better. So this book is about opening our mind and being able to rethink. Blackberries and Blockbuster movies. Remember those? These are things that no longer exist in our lives because the leaders of these organizations fail to rethink their understanding of their product and the consumers who use them. The longer we sit with our beliefs, the more entrenched and extreme they become within us. Grant says that one of the things we all do is begin to act like a preacher, a prosecutor, or a politician. We preach about our own sacred beliefs. We become a prosecutor when we recognize flaws in other people's reasonings and we try to prove them wrong. And then we become a politician when we want to win people over to our side of a belief. Instead, we need to become scientists, where rethinking is a fundamental aspect to the professional identity. Being a scientist is a frame of mind, and with this frame of mind, you're searching for the truth. What I've noticed is that we celebrate conviction, decisiveness, and certainty, and we look for that in our leadership. But this is the problem with the traditional view of leadership. Conviction, decisiveness, and certainty cause us to overlook important information and does not allow us to sit in the curious stance that will eventually get us to a better truth. The book talks about the BlackBerry CEO who failed to rethink his device when the iPhone came onto the scene. He did not test an alternative hypothesis, staying locked into the idea that he knew what people wanted. This is a critical aspect of conscious leadership, conscious parenting, and living consciously. Can you seek out alternative hypotheses and alternative explanations for the things that you feel like you're certain about? You think you know why somebody does what they do, but do you really? You think you know the best way forward to have success with this project, but have you considered alternative options? Because you may be missing something important. And here's an interesting thing. Mental horsepower does not guarantee mental dexterity. We see this in analyzing quantitative data. Most data now does have some emotional and social elements attached to it, so pure brain power doesn't allow you to see the whole story behind the data if you're not willing to question it. Get this, math whizzes are more accurate in interpreting data as long as that data supports their belief. And it might surprise you to know that the better you are at crunching numbers, the more spectacularly you're going to fail at analyzing patterns that contradict your own views. So there are two reasons for this. One is the confirmation bias, which is seeing what we expect to see, what confirms our beliefs. The other is the desirability bias, which is seeing what we want to see. These biases don't only get in our way, but they contort our own intelligence and beliefs into a weapon against the truth. And as Grant said, the best bias is the "I'm not biased" bias. So what can you do? You can think like a scientist. But it's not just reacting with an open mind, it's being actively open-minded. It's seeking out possible reasons for why you might be wrong and revising your views and ideas based on what you learn. This has actually been confirmed by researchers who have studied eminent scientists, high achievers, and great presidents. It's their cognitive flexibility and their intellectual curiosity and openness that sets them apart and drives their success. This is all about opening the door to doubt. It's questioning our current understanding to become curious about what information we might be missing. This is one of the best quotes in the book. If knowledge is power, knowing what we don't know is wisdom. So what are some examples of not rethinking? Well, this is how it shows up. Comments like, "That will never work here. That's not what my experience has shown. That's too complicated. Let's not overthink it." Or how about this one? "That's just the way we've always done it." Do any of these sound familiar? If so, you and your colleagues need to train yourselves to think again, because here's the thing. In a constantly changing world, it pays to change our minds. The book describes this incredible syndrome called Anton syndrome, which is a deficit of self-awareness in which a person is oblivious to their visual disability. It's people who are blind but unaware that they're blind. They're in denial of their vision loss. Essentially, they're blind to their own blindness. And so this can happen to us. We can be blind to our own blind spots if we don't gain the tools to recognize these spots and revise our thinking accordingly. Now let's shift gears and talk about confidence and competence. Both of these things are directly related to our way of thinking. So competence is how good you are at something. It's a measure of your abilities. And confidence is how good you think you are at something. It's that inner voice that tells you about yourself. In the case where confidence exceeds competence, we have the armchair quarterback syndrome, where you're convinced you know more than anybody on the field, and you could have called better plays, won the game, made better decisions about the game than any of the coaches and players. You probably have people like this in your life, people that know best no matter what the subject, and speak as experts, even when they have very little competence in the area. So when we overestimate our own competence, it gets in the way of rethinking because we think we don't need to rethink. Interestingly, people who scored the lowest on emotional intelligence tests weren't just the most likely to overestimate their skills, they were also the most likely to dismiss their scores as inaccurate or irrelevant. And then they were the least likely to invest in coaching and seek out self-improvement. On the other side, when competence exceeds confidence, what occurs is the imposter syndrome, which is people who don't own their competence and don't feel like they deserve their success. They feel like an imposter about to be found out. This is often presented as a bad thing, and it's frequently talked about with women because women tend to underestimate their abilities and they lack confidence that can be found in their male counterparts. But here's the interesting thing about the imposter syndrome. It can actually be a good thing. An MIT professor studied medical students in clinical rotations, and she found that those students who self-identified as imposters did not do any worse in their clinical diagnosis of their patients. And they actually did significantly better when it came to bedside manner. They were more empathetic, more respectful, and professional. And this might not come as a surprise, but they were more effective in asking questions and sharing information. So even though feeling like an imposter can be emotionally difficult, it sometimes motivates people to work harder and then strive to feel like they belong. Sometimes when we feel like an imposter, we might think we have something to prove. We might work smarter, and because we're not overconfident in our own abilities, we often rethink our strategies. Feeling like an imposter makes people better learners. Having some doubt about our knowledge and skills takes us off that pedestal and encourages us to seek insight from others. So we want to find that sweet spot between the armchair quarterback and imposter syndrome. And that's the place of confident humility. Grant talks about this as having faith in our capability while appreciating that we may not have the right solution or even be addressing the right problem. With confident humility, we have enough doubt to re-examine our knowledge and enough confidence to pursue new insights. This is really the goal where we want to be. So essentially, we're talking about our willingness and ability to be wrong. And what gets in the way is our limited skills around conflict. So the book describes two kinds of conflict: task conflict and relationship conflict. Relationship conflict are the personal and emotional clashes that don't only cause friction, but they're also filled with animosity. Task conflicts, on the other hand, are clashes about ideas and opinions. This might be clashing on who to hire or what's the most important objective for the next year. Here's an interesting thing when looking at effective teams. The most poorly performing teams have more relationship conflict than task conflict. In many ways, it makes sense. Task conflict is about competing perspectives. It's about sharing differences of opinion, questioning our methods, and then really advocating for the best way forward. The thing with relationship conflict is that it stands in our way of rethinking. When conflict gets personal and emotional, we become self-righteous. Our ego kicks in and we get locked into our perspective, and we have a tendency to dismiss the opinions and ideas that come from the other side. The work that we do with the Conscious Leadership Academy embraces conflict, but we embrace task conflict because task conflict can help us find the best way forward. It develops our creative muscles, and it really highlights the passion that people feel for their work. So when you're advocating for your beliefs, you want to get people on your side. Well, here's what the book says about the best negotiators. 1, they find common ground with the other person. They don't consider the negotiation a tug of war. 2, they achieve their point with fewer arguments. They don't just pile on opinion after opinion and fact after fact. They actually present fewer arguments that more strongly present their case. And then finally, number 3, the best negotiators behave like scientists. Instead of just preaching their own ideas or attacking their opponent's position, they have a scientist-like curiosity and they ask questions. They're willing to rethink. People are willing to rethink when an issue is presented as more than black or white. People like seeing and hearing many perspectives because we do have many perspectives, and most big issues are full of differing perspectives. Grant uses an example of how the issue of our environment has become so polarizing, it's as if there's only 2 sides to this complex problem. But that's just not the case. Maybe, Grant suggests, we could acknowledge the range where people's views actually stand. Environmental issues are not truth tellers versus deniers. People range from being mildly concerned about the environment to being skeptical or to being disengaged. Very little is black and white, either or. So if you're wanting somebody to rethink, if you're wanting to help somebody open their mind, don't tell them that they're wrong or right. Instead, present many options in the issue. And what this will do is get them to focus less on the emotional side of their side or the other side, and more on the actual issue that is full of complexity. It seems like the book Think Again is really focused on one thing, and that's a willingness to ask questions, to be curious. In fact, the book says that you can persuade people by asking them the right questions. Most of us do a lot of talking when we're trying to persuade somebody of something, but the more powerful process is to ask them questions to get them curious about their own thinking so they can discover their own reasons for changing their mind. Grant uses an example in the book about persuading someone to get the measles vaccination. I'm not sure if this was on purpose, but it's a very relevant and timely topic, and I think we sure could use more effective persuasion to get people to get vaccines right now. But don't try to do it by telling them they're wrong or stupid or selfishly putting society at risk. Ask them questions so they begin to understand their own perspective and perhaps see that there's an alternative that might actually be more preferred for them. Okay, finally, rethinking is not just an individual effort. Organizations and teams can engage in collective rethinking. And the ability to rethink and be a learning culture is critical. Take the example of the 2003 Columbia Space Shuttle. There was a known issue before takeoff with foam breaking off of the spaceship. But at the time, NASA's culture was heavily centered around performance. Getting things done with an excellent standard was the focus, as well as results. There was not a lot of room for rethinking. And then what happened? They attempted to launch the ship, and all 7 astronauts died. This is an extreme situation, but there are many examples where the culture of organizations and groups and teams don't encourage, celebrate, or even allow rethinking. This is terrible for organizations, and it's terrible for teams. If we don't rethink, we don't learn. We don't grow. We don't question our mistakes. We don't challenge the way we do things. We need more learning cultures that provide psychological safety for people wanting to ask questions, wanting to push back, wanting to challenge current ideas, because that leads to rethinking processes and ideas, and then that leads to better processes and ideas. So it's important to know that having doubt, questioning yourself, this does not make you weak or incompetent. In fact, when you adopt a curious attitude and reassess your ideas, that's when you grow. Remember, you are your values, not your beliefs. Try not to define yourself from your beliefs, or else you'll have a harder time letting those beliefs go. Define yourselves based on what's important to you, the way you move through the world. Define yourself by being a learner and being kind and curious. And then be willing to think again. Thank you so much for joining me. I really encourage you to pick up this book and read it. There are so many more nuggets, so many great stories. You will not regret reading it. I think it will help you learn to think and then think again, and it's going to make you a better person. Okay, until next time, I will see you soon.